Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see you again at today's Textile Talk. I'm Martha Seelman. I'm the Executive Director of Studio Art Quilt Associates, and we are one of the organizations that work to bring you Textile Talks every week. We couldn't do it without your support and without the support of our sponsors. So we do ask that if you enjoy Textile Talks, you consider making a donation to support the work of Textile Talks. Altogether, it costs about $47,000 just to do this every week, but we love doing it and we love providing you with information about the whole textile arts field. While you are in holiday mood, I want to just pull your attention to the fact that SAQA is having a sale right now, perfect for holiday gift giving. And please do check out SAQA.com/store. We have wonderful artwork. We have catalogs and magazines and gift memberships. And it makes a wonderful way to celebrate the holidays with your friends and family. For today's program, I am really delighted to have Lisa Ellis join us to talk about Sacred Threads. Sacred Threads is really a unique exhibition within the greater quilt world because it focuses upon the artist's personal stories of healing, grief, spirituality, peace, joy, and inspiration. And there's no other exhibition that I'm aware of, at least, that really has that same focus. And it leads to such powerful exhibitions that part of their setup each time is to make sure there are lots of boxes of tissues throughout the exhibition for visitors who are really moved by what they see. Lisa's going to tell us about the history of Sacred Threads and share some of her favorite pieces from earlier exhibitions. So enjoy. If you have questions for Lisa, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box or in the chat. If you would like closed captioning, it's available. And if you're on a computer, at the bottom of your screen, and there's a little icon that says CC. We have a live person who is doing the captioning so that we can have as great accuracy as possible to help you follow along with Lisa's presentation. So Lisa, thank you for joining us. I'm really excited to hear about Sacred Threads and your journey with that exhibition.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Martha and SAQA, for inviting me to share today. I'm a huge fan of Textile Talks, by the way. So again, thank you to all the sponsors for making that happen. It is truly an honor, and I am passionate about Sacred Threads. And so this is really a thrill to be able to tell our story. So whenever we talk about our story, it always has to start with this very special quilt. It's called Creation of the Sun and Stars. And it was made by our founder, Vikki Pignatelli, back in 1999. She entered this quilt in a prestigious quilt show, and the judges' comments came back, and there was one that was very harsh. And it was puzzling to her and hurtful to her. And so she thought about that and decided, you know, there needs to be a quilt show that is not about judging, but it gives artists a safe venue who make work that is deep and personal. This work of hers referenced God and referenced the creation story. And so she felt that that's why the judge was offended by this somewhat religious kind of statement. So she set about to put together a quilt show that would really give artists an opportunity who are making these kinds of works. It took her a couple of years. She put together her first committee, and the very first show was held in 2001. And it was in Columbus, Ohio, which is where Vikki and her committee lives. As Martha mentioned, the themes are joy, inspiration, spirituality open to all faith traditions, healing and grief. And then peace and brotherhood were added a couple of years later. It is important to say this show is juried, and that's only because of space. There are more entries that are submitted that can be hung at the quilt show, so it has to be juried. But as a part of the jurying process, it's not just the artwork itself and the jurors looking for craftsmanship. It's the jurors looking for stories and this really poignant work. So how did I get involved? Well, I started making quilts in 2003 after I retired, and I started making work watching Simply Quilts. That was my first teacher. I would watch that every morning, and I learned from some of the greats. And as I started out on my journey of making my own work, I started making quilts that were a reflection of my faith. And in 2006, my great friend, Cindy Zaki, suggested that I enter Sacred Threads. I had not heard of it. She was aware of it. And she thought this would be the perfect venue for me to get started. I'd never entered a quilt show before. So it's scary the first time. So it was a huge leap of faith for me. But I did. I entered these two artworks and they got in. So they were in the 2007 exhibit. So Cindy and I went to Columbus to see the show. And little did I know that that experience was going to change my life. So there in 2007, I met the Vikki Pignatelli. She's a very, very special, incredible artist. And at the reception, the artist reception, she spoke about this vision of why she created it and what this show means. And so I decided when I got back home, I wanted to get involved. So I volunteered to do all the techie stuff. I'm an engineer, so that comes naturally to me. So I asked if I could help with website and helping with the call for entries, all the stuff that can be more difficult for the team. Well, they were thrilled to have my support to do. I built a website, and so I helped put on the 2009 exhibit there in Columbus. I worked very closely with Vikki and with her co-chair, Wendy Biner. So I went to the 2009 exhibit to see what we had put together. And it was then that Vikki said, "We're ready to step down and we think you should take it over." And she knew that that would mean me moving it to Virginia, to the Washington, D.C. area where I live. They had at that point put on 5 exhibitions. And so they were ready for a change. So I had to think about it, of course. It's a big undertaking, but I really felt like it was the right thing to do, that I wanted to do it. And I'm very fortunate that I have a great group of friends, artist friends, local to me in the Virginia area, that when I reached out to them, they were enthusiastically on board to help. And so we took it on after 2009, and our first exhibit in the Virginia area was in 2011. Here you can see Vikki with a quilt she made for the 2011 show. So this was our first one. And she made this spectacular quilt called Against All Odds. And she came to see it, and she was really thrilled with what we put together. And she was able to come to every exhibit we've done, except the last one this past summer in 2022. But she attended every year. And we always looked for an opportunity for her to share her story. So here you can see, this is a few years ago, you can see us holding up her quilt, Creation of the Sun and Stars, and she's sharing her story with our audience. And one way or another, we always love to tell that incredibly powerful story. She's always very thrilled with what we did with the exhibit. Over the years, we've added new things. We produced a catalog, we've had a CD, just in other collaborations and special exhibits, but we never wavered from her original vision. We maintained her themes, we maintained the idea that it's not judged, that it's a safe venue for artists that are making these poignant works. I want to show you just a few examples. These are some of my favorites from over the years, and I think these are really good ambassadors to illustrate the themes that we have. So the first one, this is a memory of an 8-year-old girl. She lost her mother very suddenly, and this is a memory of what she calls the last squeeze or the last hug with her mom. Blue Wave of Healing by Peg Green. This was a very special piece that she made. It was a mantra that she used when she was dealing with breast cancer. I loved this piece so much. I asked Peg if I could find a home for it, which I did. It's now hanging in the breast surgeon's office at our local cancer center. I love this piece. I think it just illustrates beautifully the theme of joy. This is Parents with Their Newborn by Phyllis Cullen. This is a great example of a spirituality piece. I love this abstract nature of telling the story from Genesis, the 7 days of creation. And then, of course, I'm always drawn to Vikki's beautiful work. This was called The Autumn of Life. This was a 2019 piece that she made, and it's about growing older. So I just want to spend a minute talking about the word sacred. A lot of people, when they think of sacred threads, they assume that our quilt show is all about religious pieces. And it's really not that at all. In fact, you can see that with these examples here. But it's not just the spirituality theme either. It really is a much broader interpretation. And as I've thought about it, the word that it really comes down to me is the word vulnerability. What makes something sacred is the vulnerability that our artists are making of themselves by sharing these incredibly personal stories. And I just have to say to all of the artists that have been in Sacred Threads, it's such a privilege and an honor for us to exhibit this work and to allow our visitors to make really deep connections with these works. So often our visitors are going through similar experiences and they really appreciate that. So I love that word vulnerability. And as this exhibit goes forward, I think that that's what we'll always cling to, is that really special relationship that artists have and with our visitors. This was a great quote that I came across. Nanette Zeller is one of our artists. She's been in several shows with us. And she visited this summer. Our last show was this past summer in 2022. And I love this because it really captures some of that lack of judgment in this community that we have. So I just want to read her statement. As artists, we create because we are called to. And at gatherings like this, we are collectively understood by each other. No need to explain what we do or why we do it. And there are no quilt police looking at stitches per inch or accurate piecing. There are no critics making judgments on what is or isn't good art. None of that matters because we are purely expressing ourselves with textiles. thank you, Nanette, for that just beautiful quote. And you can visit Nanette's website at nanettesoz.com. So one of the things that's very unique about our exhibit is we always have a labyrinth. And we did this starting in 2011. We create this kind of crazy maze where there is no one way through the exhibit. In fact, you have to double back in order to see all the quilts. And what that does is it prevents people from doing what we call the quilt march. If you've ever seen quilters at a quilt show and everything is just, lined up, they just walk by, and before you know it, they've done the whole quilt show and they've really not seen anything. And if you've ever been to a quilt show and done the quilt march, you know that if you do happen to double back, you think, did I see this row? I'm not sure if I saw these quilts. So we really want to create an environment that causes people to slow down and to think about, have I seen these? And by doing that, it kind of ensures that they take their time. We also always have music playing in the background. It's a way of creating more of a gallery feeling, and it also encourages more quiet viewing. So it just gives a more reverence to the whole experience. We do always have the grief section is marked and it can be bypassed. It's back on the stage area. There are times when people are going through something and the grief section can be a little bit challenging to go through. So we always make it possible to see everything else but that part. And as Martha said, yes, we always have tissue boxes kind of placed throughout because it can be very moving. One of the things that we added when we took it over was what we now call the Experience Weekend. And it's where we invite viewers and artists to come and create an opportunity for connection. Here, just from a few years ago, these are two of our sponsors, Judy Gula from Artistic Artifacts and Luana Rubin from eQuilter, and they're sharing a sweet moment. And then because I'm super passionate about Studio Art Quilt Associates, we always too have had a SAQA meet and greet. And this is where we've invited our visitors and artists to come to an event. This was from a couple of years ago. And it was at this event that we talked to our artists about joining SAQA. So many of our artists, Sacred Threads might be, just like in my case, might be the very first quilt show that they get into. And then they wonder, so what's next? Well, SAQA is the perfect jumping off point for many of those newer artists. And so I've loved to share what SAQA is about and getting artists involved and helping them along kind of the next steps of their journeys. What was interesting about 2022, this past summer, is we had the SAQA event, and I asked everybody there, so how many people are SAQA members already? Every hand went up. So I thought, well, that's really good progress, because back in the previous one, it maybe was like 50-50. So we've done a really good job of sharing the SAQA story. So that evening turned out to be more of really just SAQA members enjoying the camaraderie and being together. We've also always had a really special evening, a dinner, where we set up another set of quilts, quilt show style around the ballroom. And then we have featured guests share additional stories. Here is in 2019, Deborah Boschert was our special artist teacher. And she is sharing her ladder quilt, which is one of my favorites. This past summer, we had Lyric. Montgomery Kennard was our guest speaker, lecture teacher. Another thing that we added back in 2015 was our first one is a special exhibit. And this usually comes about our Barb Hollinger, our curator. She's always just dreaming up these really cool ideas. And so this one in 2015 was this pyramid of quilts. All of these quilts were made for the purpose of bringing comfort. These belong to our committee members. So they were made by us, our grandmothers, sisters, things that we've collected, but they're all around the idea of comfort. And those tags identify that quilt and who made it and the purpose of how it was made. But I want you to hear this statement that Barb wrote to go along with this special exhibit. Here's what she says. We stitch. It's what we do. We stitch for warmth and comfort. We stitch to celebrate. We stitch to grieve. We stitch in protest and in support. We stitch for friends, for family, and for strangers we will never know. Like the ancient pyramids, the power of our craft rises from a firm base of friendship and community to an apex of strength that will stand the test of time. This was hugely successful. People that came to the 2015 just absolutely loved this pyramid and the statement and what it stood for. 2019, our special exhibit was called Eye Contact. And I want to read Barb's statement for that as well. So here's what she says. Eye contact. In a time where politics, race, and religion divide us, a personal connection to those around us is hard to establish. We walk through the world with our heads down, focused on daily tasks and distractions. Now is a time to lift our heads and make eye contact. As our gazes meet, even if only for a fleeting moment, they reignite the spark of humanity that connects us all. Lift up your head, gaze into someone's eyes, and make a connection. What's interesting about this was that she came up with this idea. She was on our metro going downtown to help a friend who owns a restaurant. And she just noticed that everybody was staring at their phones. Or as she passed homeless people on the streets of Washington, D.C., and this idea occurred to her. What's so interesting is that it was before the pandemic. So this exhibit, all about eye contact, had nothing to do with wearing masks. It seemed a bit foretelling, which is kind of spooky, but what a powerful statement about making eye contact. You can see that this was installed on boxes. They were like totems that could be rotated. There were 6 of these towers. And it was so stunning that people asked us to please travel it. There were venues that were aware of it, saw pictures, and asked if there was any way that they could get it. Well, it was completely impractical to try to do something with these boxes. And so Barb re-engineered it. And here you can see this is in Houston in 2021. It traveled for over 2 years to various venues, but you can see how it was re-engineered on these screens, these double-sided screens, and equally powerful, and it allowed it to travel pretty well. So Sacred Threads is a nonprofit in the US, but we are completely run by volunteers. We're lean and scrappy. It takes quite a few volunteers to do all of the work that is done. Here on the left, you can see when eye contact was being put together. And then on the right, this is actually an older committee picture. We're usually too busy actually to get a group picture. So I found this one from a few years ago. But we have usually about 17 people that are a part of putting on Sacred Threads, a core of a handful of folks that are working behind the scenes all the time. And then when we actually go to put on the exhibit, it takes about a team of this size to do everything, to do all the unpacking and the setup, and then work the exhibit, and then all the takedown. One of the things I've really appreciated that we've been able to do is a collaboration with the Quilt Alliance. Quilt Alliance, of course, is also a part of the Textile Talks. And there's a great overlap between Sacred Threads and the mission of the Quilt Alliance to capture stories, because Sacred Threads is all about the stories. it's been really great to work with the Quilt Alliance to capture those. So at our experience weekend, starting in 2013, we've done a conference. We call it Not Fade Away, not fading away, meaning no anonymous quilts, trying to capture the stories. And so we've done a joint conference where we've had a half-day event where our artists get to learn about what the Quilt Alliance is doing and then hear some additional stories, have a labeling workshop, things of that sort. But then also Emma Parker, who you can see the back of here or behind the camera, she will come early to the exhibit and we try to capture as many stories as we can. One of the oral history projects of the Quilt Alliance is called Go Tell It at the Quilt Show. It's a 3-minute video where somebody stands with their quilt, or if they don't have the quilt with them, an image can be overlaid later. But on video, they tell the story of a special quilt, either one that they've made or one that they have. So over the course of the exhibitions that we've done with the Quilt Alliance, we now have over 90 Go Tell It's recorded just from Sacred Threads. They are on the Sacred Threads website. There are links to the YouTubes, and then you can also find them on the Quilt Alliance webpage. I highly encourage everybody to go check those out. There are just some amazing stories that people have shared, and it's so fun to hear the artists talk in their own voice about their work. I want to now share a couple of Go Tell It's that were taken this past summer. I think that these do a great job of just illustrating. The first one by Luana is going to be a story of inspiration, and then our second one is going to be of spirituality. So I'm going to play this 3-minute video and you'll hear one of our sponsors, Luana Rubin, talk about her very special quilt that she made for us this past summer.
Hi, I'm Luana Rubin. I'm here at Sacred Threads 2022 in Herndon, Virginia. And this is my piece, Stardust Mothers. And I wanted to share with you a little bit about the story of this piece. I had kind of a waking dream in one of my meditations about all of the generations of women, all of the ancestors, the grandmothers and great-grandmothers who are watching over the earth, who are handing down their archetypal wisdom to daughters and granddaughters. And I've been doing a lot of research on Ancestry.com, and I've found that there are things from my ancestry that are still part of our family. So that was really inspiring. And I just thought, how can I put this into a quilt? And in this sort of waking dream, I had this image of all these women sort of disappearing back into the mists of time, kind of like guardian angels for the earth. And I know for sure I'm still connected to some of my ancestors who cared very deeply about the earth, about protecting the women in their family, of course, protecting their children, their land. And so that was the inspiration for this piece. And recently I've made a commitment that all of the quilts that I make, all of the artwork that I make from now on is going to be activist art. In other words, taking on an issue and making a statement about it visually, because a lot of times you can reach people's heart with an image or with art in a way that you couldn't with words. Sometimes with words, people just, oh, I don't want to hear that. But then sometimes they see, what I hope is that people will see this from a distance and they'll say, what's that? And they'll come closer and they'll start to see the details and they'll be drawn in and they'll just think about it, And if they have a closed heart or mind to this idea about protecting the earth, I hope that it cracks the door open just a little bit. So you can see that there are many women here, and I tried to put as much diversity as possible. My great Swedish grandmother who emigrated from Sweden is up here in the corner. And then we have just the great grandmothers of times past in the distance here, kind of disappearing into the past. And I love putting the image of the earth into my work. And you may see that up north here, the northern lights are in the body of this woman who is with her daughter. And I tried to give kind of an impression of a glow of light coming from the planet reflecting on their faces. With regard to technique, I started out as on a white piece of cloth, and I drew all the faces just freehand spontaneously with Inktense pencils. Then I used medium and brushes to brush the faces, and it gives kind of a watercolor blending effect. And then the rest of it is fused applique and then free motion stitching. And this piece is really close to my heart. I just feel so proud and happy that I could finish this piece, that it could be in the show. And after this, it's going to the Festival of Quilts in Birmingham. It'll be shipped out on Monday after the show closes. And I also just want to say that we've been a sponsor. My company, equilter.com, has been a sponsor of the show for years and years. And I just love coming here and being sort of floating in the waters of all of the beautiful energy of these quilts. Thank you. Hi, I'm Luana Rubin.
So now I want to switch gears, and we're going to hear from Tony Kersey. And I loved this. It's a story of spirituality, and it's a religion that I knew very little about. And I love that I got to learn something new.
Hi, my name is Tony Kersey, and we are at Sacred Threads in Virginia. I'm here today to speak a little bit about my quilt. This quilt was done after I was at my grandson's graduation, and it was held in a Catholic church. And I looked around at the art and the stained glass windows, and I didn't see any representation of anybody of color. And I thought, am I supposed to be a part of this whole situation if I'm not represented here? And it made me curious about the religions of West Africa. And I researched a little bit, and the reason West Africa, because traditionally the enslaved people in America come primarily from West Africa. And I was moved by a couple of traditions. One was Nkisi and Kondo, which are power figures, they're sculptural power figures. And the other was about the Benga people from Gabon. And the Benga people believe that the ancestors live in the forest. And therefore you see a lot of forest representation in my quilt, embroidered leaves and trees and flowers and stuff. And the Nkisi reference is the mirror in the center of the belly. And the reason that the mirror is there is because the spiritual people that made the Nkisi, they would put medicine and herbs behind the mirror inside of the sculpture. And also the mirror is for the ancestors to look through, and they can see the malevolent bad forces. And the Nkisi is to protect you from bad forces. And she's wearing a mask, not because of COVID, she's wearing a mask because the telling of the religion had been stifled. We weren't allowed to pass our religion down from ancestor to, from generation to generation. The tree represents the ancestrals, and also it represents the base of our religion. That's pretty much it. These are all a lot of them are hand dyed fabrics that I did, and her hands are up because she's open to anybody coming in that she can protect. So that's it. Cool.
So now I just want to switch gears and just give you just a sampling of some of the quilts that were in our last exhibit this past summer. And all of these are now traveling, so they're in our travel exhibit. So here's a couple of examples of spirituality. This one on the left by Shannon Dion from the Marav Aravim, a Jewish evening prayer service. And then the one on the right is a lion goddess figure from Katal, Turkey, which for millennia civilizations have worshipped this goddess of the lions. So two very interesting examples of spirituality. Another set of samples, this is from our healing theme. The one on the left by Heather Prager talks about the high anxiety that she was feeling, amazing highs and lows, and it got reflected in her artwork. And then Barbara Jones on the right, she lost both her daughter and granddaughter within 8 months of each other. And so these circles on the quilt just represent that circle of life as they're rising. Beautiful examples of healing. It's interesting about the grief category. We see kind of two different types. This is a sample of where people are experiencing grief, but it's about other people, not necessarily their own grief. These all have to do with refugees. The one on the left by Ivy, this is the testimony of a woman whose daughter died while in an ICE camp. The one in the middle is from her mother's story. Gabrielle de Toda talks about her mother's having to be resettled after World War II. And then the one on the right is the separation between mother and child at the borders. So all of these are somewhat related. So they are in conversation with one another. But I love that people are really moved by other people's stories and not necessarily their own. And then these are two samples from our grief theme, but these are very personal. So in both of these cases, Sharon Buck and Hope Woolworth have both lost their husbands. And so these stories are talking about a very, very personal loss. Peace and Brotherhood is an area that was added a few years ago. And the one on the left by Eileen Doty, she talks about, this one's about the environment and about thinking globally and acting locally. And then the one on the right is actually somewhat related to the refugees. You all remember the very famous photograph in National Geographic of the Afghan woman, and her name was Sharbat. And then, so this is a representation of that famous photograph. And then she talks about her story of 300,000 hand stitches to dedicate to the millions of souls that have been displaced from the homeland. These are two joy pieces. The one on the left, Balloon Days, that certainly looks joyous. She talks about, this is a picture of her two sons when they were little. But what's interesting in her story is that the older one has autism, and over the years, he's been speaking less. And so this is actually somewhat of a healing grief journey, but it's the joy that she experiences when she goes back and reflects on this really happy photograph from long ago. And then this one on the right, I love this piece about yoga offering strength and serenity. This is a beautiful piece by Maggie Ward. And then finally, our last theme is inspiration. This piece, The Creative Hand, I think we can all identify with that. Creativity is central to so many of us in using our hands in the creative work that we do. And then this piece on the right by Judith Roderick, she talks about this is an image of us in humanity moving up the emotional scale, she says, with hate and fear at the base, and then moving up through towards love and appreciation. So all of those pieces, plus all of the ones that are traveling, there are 39 in the collection, are on our website. And I do hope you will go and check it out. We have an audio recording for each of the 39 pieces. So if you go and you check out our the 3D exhibit that we have, you can click on each one, you can read the statement. I just really quickly went over it. There are some just beautiful statements, and you can read the statements and you can listen to the artists in their own voice tell their stories. And you can also see where it's traveling. You might be able to catch it. It is traveling all over the US for the next couple of years. It will go through the summer of 2024. Another offshoot of what we've done with Sacred Threads is getting art into hospitals. We had an invitation from NIH, the National Institutes of Health, back in the spring of 2020. And so we brainstormed putting together an exhibit called Backyard Escape. They were all 18 inches by 24 inches. And we were really thrilled with the response that we got. More than 100 pieces, and we were able to travel them to hospitals during the pandemic for 2 years. The sales benefited both the artists and then also the hospital's own programs for their patient support. And then all of the unsold pieces were at Sacred Threads this past summer, and we continued to sell them. And all the proceeds went to our local Inova Shar Cancer Center. And I want to show you this one image. This was a piece that was actually in our main exhibit by Albert Feldman. And with the proceeds from Backyard Escape, we were able to purchase some works chosen by Inova. They asked for what they wanted. This piece by Albert, and then also a few of the Backyard Escape pieces were purchased with those proceeds. And they are now hanging at the Cancer Center in our local area. We were also given the opportunity to commission works for the Inova Fair Oaks Radiation Oncology Unit. So we used the Backyard Escape pieces. We showed them to the director and she chose her favorites, and we commissioned artists to make larger versions of those. Here you see Barb Hollinger with her piece. Over on the right, you see Nanette Zeller's piece. And I'll just show you a few. This one over the door by Sarah Ensminger, and then Gina Gahigan's piece in the waiting area. And then Bobby Nolan and Kathy Briggs. This is a nurse's station. And then this is actually the entrance to the radiation, where the big radiation machine is. We love collaborations. I am always looking for the opportunity to create new opportunities for our artists. And I started working with Barry Broadway of the of the Broadway Gallery. I would bring the work in for him to install it in the hospitals or to do the framing. And every time I would bring in new artwork, he would just, his mind was blown by this textile art and he wanted to learn more about it. And so we brainstormed putting together a joint exhibit. We brought Barb Hollinger into the conversation, and we came up with this idea to do Harmony. Harmony worked well under the umbrella of the Sacred Threads themes. And Barb designed this very cool layout for the pieces being square and then multiples of 12 so that they could kind of nest. It was there at the Broadway Gallery through August, and now 28 of the pieces, we've traveled them up to the University of Chicago Medical Center there. And I just want to show you one little quick, these are just a few slides here of how it looked when it was at the Broadway Gallery this past summer. It's just, it looked really cool. We do make catalogs for all of these exhibits. This is our main exhibit from this past summer, and then we have catalogs for Harmony, for our Backyard Escape, and for Eye Contact. If you are at all interested, they're all for sale on Amazon. You can just search for them there, or if you go to our website, there is a link that will take you right to Amazon to purchase them. So this is the big conversation that everybody would love to have, and that's what's next for Sacred Threads. We announced this past spring and summer that our current leadership team is stepping down. It's been 13 years and we're all getting older, and it's time for us to raise up a new team. Just as we took it over 13 years ago and moved it to where we live, we're hoping that there's another leadership team in the wings somewhere that is interested, that has the desire and the passion and would like to take it on. They can certainly make it their own, just as we have, add to it, or do something different with it. And so we're hoping that we'll have some new people that would be interested in doing it. Doesn't have to be the size. We've always had around 250 quilts. It doesn't have to be as big as that. In the interim, we hope to continue to have a travel exhibit. I think we can, be pretty assured that it won't just go away completely. Right now, our exhibit goes through 2024, the summer, but we could start another travel exhibit to follow on that one with brand new artwork. So for everybody out there who is wondering about whether they should make new work, I think it's very likely that we could have a travel exhibit that could continue even if we don't mount a huge show. It's still a hope. That's not a commitment to do that, but that's what we're hoping, that we could see at least keep a travel exhibit going so that we can keep it going. We have a future interest form on our website. If you are at all interested in taking on the leadership, we would love to talk to you. And you can just easily fill out this little form and let us know that you would like to have a conversation about that. I am so thankful that you came today or are watching this later on online. I hope you'll go to our website and check out the store, the stories, the travel exhibit, and I hope you'll connect with us on Facebook and Instagram.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, the website is really a lot of fun. Definitely a place where you can spend a lot of time looking at the artwork and reading the stories. Someone asked whether the materials and techniques for each piece are also on the website, or if it's really focused on the stories that the art is trying to share.
So I love that question. We do not emphasize the techniques. They do sometimes get addressed in the Go Tell It's. Our artists will often talk about their techniques. But this is actually really funny. At the quilt show, we only put the story and then the artist name, of course, and where they're from on the signage. And inevitably, quilters will say, "Where's the technique? I want to know how they made it." Well, that we feel like that's a distraction from the story. And we really don't want our visitors necessarily focused on that. We do have the information. And so if somebody is just dying to know, then I can just always pull it up on my laptop, and I'm always happy to share that information. But it isn't actually typically readily available because we really are trying to focus on the story. But it's a great question. We as quilters want to know, how did they do that?
That's right.
Well, I get it.
See the back. We want to look at the stitching. I wanted to ask you a couple of questions. One was, so you have a number of broad themes, which you talked about. So does the artist choose the theme, or is that something that you and your committee decide when you see all of the submissions?
Yeah, great question. The artists do choose the theme. When they enter their piece, they select the theme. Very occasionally, we will change it. Sometimes we'll feel like it's actually a better fit. And part of that in our curation, when Barb is doing the layout, sometimes there's a piece, there's like a transition. Healing is usually near grief. And so sometimes it'll be more appropriate and just from a transition point of view. So we do feel like we can change a theme, but it's not that common. I mean, maybe 1 or 2 times per show do we change the theme. So typically, no, the artist is choosing it.
I love your description of Sacred Threads as being about vulnerability, as particularly obviously emotional vulnerability. And it reminds me of something that a former SAQA president, Chris Sasaki, used to say, which is that her art is an expression of her soul. And that really describes all of the art that's in Sacred Threads. Are there ever pieces that you feel are beyond what your audience is ready to look at, and so you do not include them for that reason? They're too vulnerable.
Too vulnerable. I off the top of my head, I can't think of an example of that. We've never had a piece. I mean, we've always been concerned that we might get a piece that's not family friendly. Our venue is in a church, and while they are open to, all of our themes, all all faith traditions. We haven't faced a situation where there would be something that could be questionable. I mean, I'm thinking of maybe nudity. It just hasn't happened. It is possible that we could get a piece, but we've been fortunate. There hasn't been a situation where we have felt like we couldn't hang something.
So there's another question about whether you've ever had size restrictions, given where you hang the pieces.
Yes, we do have size restrictions. We have a maximum size, and that's just based on the size of our drapes, the size of the panels to safely hang something. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's basically a queen size quilt will fit. So kind of that size down, but it's strictly just based on our panel size. As far as a minimum, we use a perimeter size because rather than just a width, because we don't want pieces that are too small that get lost. If you've got several large pieces and then you've got this little tiny one, it just doesn't have the same impact. But a long skinny piece can actually have really good impact. So our minimum size has basically been a perimeter. And I've always said in the fine print, it's just a suggestion. We don't throw anything out on size, but we're suggesting that if it's too small, that we may not choose it. So it's more of a suggestion. The maximum size is legit because we can't hang anything that is too big.
Sure. There was a question about the eye contact exhibition. How many artists ended up participating in that approximately?
I think about 250. I think there were 244 pieces in our travel exhibit. That's a little murky. And actually, maybe it's a little less than that because people made multiple pieces. We'll say 200.
It was an extremely striking exhibition to have all of those eyes looking at you and interacting with your gaze. It was just a powerful exhibition. The other thing that you said was about how Barb Hollinger creates a maze so that people have to slow down, and that you add music to just make it a very reverent experience of looking at the art and taking the time to look at the art. And I wanted to ask, what kind of music do you use to enhance that request to just slow down and look?
So I found this really great CD. It's instrumental music, but it has sounds of birds and water in the background. I would call it basically classical. There's a couple of well-known, there's mostly songs that you wouldn't have heard of, and then there's a couple woven in there that like Ode to Joy, something that somebody will have heard of, but mostly it's tunes that it's just subtle. It's just beautiful instrumental music, but the birds and the water, and if you're quiet, you can hear it. And it's really, it's a nice soundtrack.
The people who've been posting in the chat, who've had the opportunity to attend in person, all said what a powerful experience it was to go to Sacred Threads and how much they appreciate all of the work that you and your other volunteers have done to make this possible. I want to thank you again for doing this presentation for Textile Talks today. If you, the audience, have enjoyed Textile Talks, please do consider making a donation to help offset the costs of doing these talks. We really depend upon your generosity and the generosity of our sponsors to make Textile Talks possible. Please do go to the Sacred Threads Quilts website and see more of the art, read more of the stories. They do have information where you can fill out the form if you were considering that maybe you would be interested in becoming the next leader for Sacred Threads. Fill out that form. Lisa's very easy to talk to, and she can tell you all about how it's worked for her and discuss how it might work for you. Next week on Textile Talks, Surface Design Association is going to be showcasing some of the really exciting workshops that they have coming up in 2023. So you won't want to miss seeing a little teaser for all of those really interesting makers and joining us as we continue with Textile Talks. I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us today.